Let's go ahead and go to our next call. This is Steven in Michigan. Hey, Steven, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Dan. How's it going?
Going all right, man. How are you?
Doing well.
Cool.
How are you, Dave?
Hey, Steven. Good to talk to you, man.
All right. So this is my one note I have here. It says, new chronology, human history is only 1,000 years old.
Yeah. Have you guys ever heard of that?
I think I've heard of this.
We're learning
before.
new stuff today. So
I swore I've read something like this before. It's like this idea that like a lot of human history has kind of been constructed, but I can't remember the reasons why or any of the details. Right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Just personally, I've been going through it for the last couple of years. I decided to pick it because I thought it had some merit to it, but at the same time, I was studying logic and trying to find something to test it on. And it's a huge thing. It's called Semyenka's New Chronology, and it's a empirical statistical analysis of narrative materials. And basically, it just accounts for a lot of weird issues and whatnot in the history books. And so it's kind of interesting just to go through and just going back on it myself. I was familiar with world history to a degree, prior to looking into it, and then looking back on it all, I kind of wonder, how do we know about this type of stuff? And so I guess one of the main things is textual, like the manuscripts and stuff, tablets and whatnot. Like, how do we actually know what happened in history? It's pretty weird stuff, but
so
I don't know.
Break this down for me. How do we get to that it's only 1,000 years old? Where does that number come from?
So pretty much what the theory is summarized. This is going to be really simple. It's a complex theory, but there's a few tools that were developed to analyze narrative materials, and what the summary of it all is basically that there's the Greco-Roman timeline, which is the backbone to history. Pretty much that was developed around the 15th to 16th centuries. Following that, the next two major studies were Egyptian studies and Indian studies that came out of that, and into the Near East and Asiatic studies spawning out of there. But pretty much it's based off of this Greek-Roman timeline. And it's really heavily based around the Byzantine structure. And pretty much when you analyze the information that we have, there are parallels throughout these different segments of these kingdoms that are eerily similar. Like, statistically, it's almost impossible that this would happen over and over again unless somebody had an original document and had made copies of it and sent it out. And kind of like the telephone game, everything got a little distorted depending on where you went.
I guess I'm confused because we've got a calendar that's 2,000 years old, or 2019.
Right. We have.
I don't understand.
I think more accurately, we have a calendar that's been dated. We've been dated out 2019 years since the birth of Christ, which apparently is a huge issue, because some people don't even think he actually exists. So that, I guess, would be a whole nother conversation. But
I don't know how we got those 2019 years, even if we're basing it on a mythological figure, if you believe that, or, AD, after divinity. If we're marking it doesn't matter what we base the years we're marking on, we're basing them on something, and somebody has counted 2019 years. I don't understand.
Even beyond that, I guess my first question would be, like, what about like carbon dating and these other kinds of radiometric
the Christians
dating that we have?
they've debunked all that anyway.
Well, not just radiometric. I mean, there's other methods of dating that we've used to kind of indicate how old this stuff is. I mean, like when we put that data into account, I mean, how does that square up?
Right. So first of all, it's the Gregorian calendar. I just wanted to hit that real quick.
Yeah.
That was devised around in the middle of the 16th century. Was when they decided that's what year it was there. I mean, depending on what calendar you're looking at, there's a lot of different years that are right now. We're in the year like 2002, or some, I think people are in the 4000s currently, depending on how they date it from. But the Byzantine calendar was technically Anno Mundi dating traditionally, so it was based since the creation of the world in from their eyes,
Yep.
From what they had calculated. So that's also, it's an interesting question.
Clarification there.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well,
I am still interested. So, like the radiometric, well, not just radiometric dating, but just the various methods of dating that we've had, besides looking at actual text. Yeah. So, like, we definitely have dates of, different kinds of stuff. Like, I know, for example, they were using some method when they were talking about the Shroud of Turin, when they discovered that it really just came from like medieval Europe, and not actually from like the time of Christ, that kind of stuff. So like, I mean, we have these other methods. Like, is this kind of theory taking into account these other methods on why they would produce other kinds of dates?
Yeah, this is an all-encompassing theory. There's not anything out there that I haven't seen covered, at least briefly, in this idea. But as far as the radiocarbon datings go, the idea there is that they're still very inaccurate as to what they could be with higher calibration. Did you know that how they were originally calibrated, or the dates were initially calculated, were based off of allegedly known dates, such as like bread from Pompeii or like stuff that mummies were in?
Well, I mean, there's potassium argon dating, there's radiocarbon dating. I mean, there's multiple ones that are based off of the half-life of, we're talking about chemistry here. We're not necessarily talking about like specific dates and time where these are measured at, right?
Right.
You guys are over my head. All I know how to talk about is religion and dying.
Were you aware of the way that it was initially calculated?
I mean, maybe if it was initially calculated, but I mean, even then we have tons of other methods.
So then it's made some improvements since then.
Sure.
Correct.
Yeah.
But do you know what the days, like how far it can date accurately?
Well, which type of dating? Because again, there's different kinds, right? So I know. So
when radiocarbon dating.
Radiocarbon dating does have its inaccuracy, and a lot of that stuff doesn't actually help with closest to human history, right? It's much better with dates much more far distant in the past. And so radiocarbon isn't the best example I could definitely come up with. But I mean, we can count tree rings. We can do all kinds of other kinds of stuff to kind of measure things. I know that I can't remember, but we've been able to do like look at the shards of like clay pots and see like the I want to say it's like the electrostatic kind of resonance from them. That could be just made up words.
Pre-existing written instructions.
That's right, pre-existing written instructions of those clay pots, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, those are all taken into consideration. But honestly, that kind of gets me all like fired up for science and trying to get more exploration done. Because right now we've got, I think, less than 5% of the ocean explored. The deepest tunnel we've ever made is like 8 kilometers.
Yeah.
We've been tracking this stuff for, I think, 70 years, close to, trying to get the data. But so we still have an incredibly limited amount of information that we're working with to try and figure out exactly how these are going to be affected throughout.
I think we're always learning more
periods
stuff.
of time.
Yeah, for sure. And human history is definitely mysterious. I mean, I wish I just had more kind of information to look at from what you're talking about right now, only because it's hard for me to say, especially
over my head.
But like alternative. So when it comes to like pseudoscience has nothing against pseudo history, especially pseudo archaeology. And I'm not necessarily saying, Stephen, that what you're saying like completely is off the rails. But what I am saying is
it's a little different.
When you look up like the claims people make about especially like biblical archology and stuff like that, people come up with all kinds of stuff to make things, and that's where you get some of the crazy. So I don't know. It's something I have to look into. Something I have to look into, Stephen.
Yeah, no, definitely. As I was looking into it, I was some of the questions that I had. I was thinking, man, I should really know the answer to this just off the top of my head if I want to.
Yeah, there's just too much to know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you look at the history of human cultures and you see that each culture kind of has its own history of how they came to be. The Greeks definitely had their own way of thinking about things, and the Spartans had their own kind of mythology and stuff like that.
Right.
So it is fascinating to see how we came to our current view and how accurate it is.
The thing that really got me into it was comparative religion. was looking into like the similarities between the gods.
Oh, you got to be careful there, Stephen. You got to be careful there. Well, you know what I mean? Because people make that stuff all the time. And if you ever talk to Hindus in particular, the ones I've talked to, a lot of them try to pull that on you. I remember I was talking to a Hindu buddy of mine who was like saying like, yeah, you know, Jesus was just a spiritual master. You know, he had mastered kind of the nirvana state and was here to teach.
Disappear and walk through walls.
Yeah, you know, like people kind of make these kinds of claims.
Turn water into bourbon.
Yeah,
all those things.
So you know, that's out there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting list out there that compares like the text and stuff, and it kind of shows like on the traditional timeline that you guys I think would accept. You know, 2019. Yeah. It shows where Christianity.
Yeah, I just go by the Google Calendar.
Ideas, you know. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an interesting chart for any people that want to know more about like the history on the traditional timeline.
I want to ask one last question before we let you go here, Stephen. I'm really interested in anthropology and stuff, and you know, we have evidence of we might not call them human, but definitely human-like groups of people living on Earth at different points of time, and we have cave paintings, we've got tools, we've got the remnants of graves and stuff like that. Does this particular theory that you know of take account for all these even kind of ancient history stuff, or are we just talking about modern human civilization?
No, this is talking about ancient and medieval history and analyzing through these empirical statistical methods the correlations and disconnections between them.
Okay.
Well, identify kind of how it all pieces together.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I don't believe it, but it's interesting. Maybe next time, maybe we'll have to dig into it a little bit more. I've always wanted to do themed episodes on this show and kind of dig into topics a bit more. I think one of the problems is you limit the amount of calls you can talk about.
Because you can't know everything, can you, Dan?
Well, it's also just because people feel like they can't call about what they want to talk about and stuff like that. And also, like, it's fun to have experts on that kind of stuff here. So maybe that's something I'll have to get someone who knows more about human history and stuff. But, Stephen,
I'll have to wait until you have a historian on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's not me.
Yeah, but I love this kind of stuff. And thanks for bringing me something. You think you heard it all, and then you hear some more. So thanks for calling, Stephen. Yeah, and would love to hear from you again about this.